The sun was dipping low when the cowboy rode into town, his horse dusty, his saddle worn, and his pockets carrying just enough coins for the supplies he needed. He was a man of few words, his life lived more in silence and the whisper of wind across empty prairies than in the company of men. He tied his horse near the general store and walked in with the steady gait of someone who knew hardship but didn't complain about it. Inside, townsfolk glanced at him briefly then looked away. They knew his kind, lonely, weathered men who didn't stay long. He gathered flour, beans, and coffee, his usual purchases, and laid them on the counter. He didn't notice the pair of eyes watching him from the street through the dusty glass. When he stepped back outside, balancing his supplies, he saw her. She wasn't dressed for town life. Her wedding dress hung torn and dirty, lace dulled to gray, the hem stained by mud. Her hair was tangled, her cheeks hollowed by hunger. She stood barefoot on the boardwalk, her hands trembling as she reached out to a passing woman, whispering, "Please, just a piece of bread." The woman pulled her shawl tighter and hurried on. The cowboy paused. He had seen desperation before, in cattle starving after a drought, in men broken by war, but never had he seen it etched so deep into a young woman's face. She turned her eyes toward him, and he caught the glimmer of something more than hunger. It was shame, raw and unbearable, as though begging had crushed what dignity she had left. He shifted his supplies, pulled a loaf from the top of his sack, and held it out. She stared at it for a long moment before snatching it and holding it against her chest like a treasure. Tears filled her eyes as she whispered, "Thank you, sir." Her voice cracked with exhaustion. But as she tore the bread and ate, he noticed the bruises on her wrists, the broken lace at the neckline of her dress. This was not the look of a runaway bride who fled a ceremony. This was a girl who had been dragged, discarded, and left to starve. "You got folks?" he asked, his voice low, steady. She shook her head quickly, eyes darting as though the very thought of speaking the truth might summon ghosts. "No one. Not anymore." The cowboy wasn't the type to meddle. He had lived by the rule that every man and woman must carry their own weight. But watching her huddle in her torn gown, crumbs on her lips and tears streaking her face, he felt something stir inside him, something that had been silent for too long. He glanced back toward the store, then at the townspeople who pretended not to see her. No one moved to help. No one offered a kind word. She was invisible to them, an inconvenience, a shame they refused to acknowledge. He untied his horse, adjusted his gear, and looked at her again. She stood frozen, clutching the last of the bread as though it might be snatched away. "Come on," he said simply. Her eyes widened. "Where?" "Someplace where you won't have to beg." She hesitated. Fear and mistrust flickered across her face, but hunger and exhaustion overpowered them. Slowly, she took a step, then another, until she stood beside his horse. He offered his hand. After a long pause, she placed her fragile fingers in his calloused palm, and he lifted her gently into the saddle. The townsfolk glanced out of corners of their eyes, whispering, but he didn't care. He swung up behind her, steady and sure, and with a light nudge, his horse carried them away from the town. The prairie stretched wide and endless, the horizon painted with fire from the setting sun. She leaned back slightly, her breath unsteady, as if she still couldn't believe she wasn't dreaming. For the first time in what seemed like forever, she wasn't standing alone on a boardwalk, begging for scraps. And though neither of them spoke another word on that ride, something passed between them, a quiet understanding, the kind that didn't need to be named. The horse carried them steadily out of town, its hooves drumming softly against the dirt road that wound through the prairie. The girl clung to the saddle horn, her thin fingers trembling, her body swaying as though she wasn't used to riding. He steadied her with one arm, not touching her more than necessary, just enough to keep her from slipping. The wind tugged at her ruined dress, carrying with it the smell of dust, leather, and the faint lingering aroma of bread on her hands. For a while, neither spoke. He was a man used to silence, and she seemed too broken to find words. The vast land spread out before them, golden grass rippling under the last sweep of sunlight. He rode with the easy patience of someone who had nowhere urgent to be, yet with a certainty that he was moving forward for a reason he hadn't expected when he first entered town that morning. As the stars began to prick the sky, the girl's voice, faint as a sigh, drifted back to him. "Why'd you help me?" He didn't answer right away. He wasn't a man who wasted words, and he wasn't sure he knew the answer himself. Finally, he said, seemed wrong not to. She nodded slightly, though her shoulders trembled. She wasn't used to kindness, that much was plain. He could feel it in the way she stiffened whenever he shifted behind her, as if waiting for roughness that never came. Her silence was heavy, thick with memories she carried but hadn't spoken of. They rode until the moon rose, pale and watchful. When the land began to slope toward a creek where cottonwoods gathered like quiet sentinels, he pulled the reins. "We'll stop here for the night." She slid down unsteadily, her bare feet sinking into the cool earth. He dismounted and began gathering wood, his movements efficient. She watched him for a moment, unsure if she should help, then crouched by the creek and dipped her hands into the water. The reflection that stared back at her was ghost-like, a bride who never made it to her altar. She shivered, rubbing the dirt from her skin. Soon the fire crackled, casting an orange glow across the clearing. He set a pan on the flames, poured beans into it, and handed her a tin cup filled with water. She held it like it was something sacred, sipping slowly. When he passed her a piece of cornbread from his supplies, she accepted it with both hands, biting into it hungrily but still with a strange grace, as if she remembered what it meant to be proper, even if the world had stolen everything else from her. "Got a name?" he asked quietly. She hesitated, eyes lowering to the ground. "Anna," she whispered, though it sounded like a name she hadn't spoken aloud in a long while. He nodded once. "I'm Cole." She looked up at him for a moment, studying his face in the firelight. He was weathered, with lines carved deep by sun and wind. His eyes were steady, unflinching, but there was no cruelty in them. She swallowed hard, unsure why that steadiness unsettled her more than harshness would have. Perhaps because it offered her something she didn't trust, safety. They ate in silence. When the fire burned low, Cole spread his blanket on one side of the fire and gestured for her to take the other. She curled up, pulling the tattered skirts of her dress around her like a shroud. Her body trembled, though whether from cold or from memories, he couldn't tell. He lay awake longer than he usually would, listening to her uneven breaths, the crackle of dying embers, the soft trickle of the creek. He was used to solitude, but tonight, solitude had changed shape. The next morning, he saddled the horse early, dividing his supplies so she could eat again. She moved stiffly, her eyes swollen from sleep, but she seemed a little stronger than the day before. When he handed her a strip of jerky, she whispered, "Thank you," as though she feared the words might be too much. They rode onward across the plains. He didn't ask her story, but fragments slipped out in broken whispers as the miles passed. Her family had married her off to a man she barely knew, a man whose wealth was supposed to mean safety. Instead, it had meant bruises, locked doors, and a life shrinking smaller with every passing day. On her wedding night, she had fled, but she didn't get far. Men sent to drag her back had found her, beaten her, and left her in the dress she wore, like some cruel reminder of what she could never escape. Cole listened without judgment. He didn't interrupt, didn't offer pity. He simply let her words fall into the open air, where the prairie swallowed them like secrets too heavy to carry alone. And somehow, the fact that he didn't try to fix what couldn't be fixed gave her more comfort than empty reassurances ever could. By the third day, she began to ask small questions about him. Did he live alone? Yes. Did he have family? Not anymore. Did he ever think about leaving the ranch? No reason to. His answers were short, clipped, but she learned more from what he didn't say than from what he did. She could feel the weight of loneliness in him, the kind of silence that comes not from choice but from having no one left to break it. When they reached his ranch, nestled between rolling hills and a stretch of forest, Anna stared in disbelief. It wasn't grand, but it was solid, a cabin of rough timber, smoke curling from the chimney, a small corral with a few cattle grazing nearby. She had expected emptiness, but here was life, worn but steady. Cole dismounted, helped her down, and motioned toward the cabin. "You'll be safe here." She stepped inside cautiously. The cabin was simple but clean, with a sturdy table, a bed against the far wall, shelves lined with jars of dried goods. She touched the wooden frame of the doorway as though grounding herself in the reality of it. Over the days that followed, she began to find pieces of herself again. She mended what clothes she could, swept the floors, cooked when he was out tending cattle. She had once been taught that a woman's worth was in her service, but here, there was no demand, only the quiet gratitude in his eyes when he returned to a warm meal or found the fire already burning. He didn't treat her labor as owed, and that made her offer it freely. One evening, after weeks of silence broken only by necessity, she asked softly, "Why do you live alone?" He was sharpening a knife by the fire, the steady rasp of stone against steel filling the room. He paused, staring into the flames. "Had a wife once. Fever took her. After that, no reason to go looking for more trouble." Her throat tightened. She looked at him, not with pity, but with the recognition of someone who knew loss too well. She didn't press him further. Instead, she stood, poured him another cup of coffee, and set it by his hand. He glanced up, their eyes meeting briefly, and something unspoken passed between them again, something fragile but steady. The months wore on. Spring softened the land, wildflowers blooming in the fields. Anna no longer looked like a ghost in a ruined wedding dress. She wore simple clothes Cole had traded for in town, her hair braided neatly, her cheeks fuller from regular meals. She laughed once, soft, startled, as though she'd forgotten how. Cole had been fixing a fence when she slipped on the damp grass, catching herself awkwardly, and the sound had bubbled out of her before she could stop it. Cole froze at the sound, his hands still on the post, and for the first time in years, his lips curved into something close to a smile. But shadows lingered. At night, she sometimes woke gasping, clutching her chest, the memories of rough hands and locked doors dragging her back. Each time, Cole stayed on his side of the fire or the room, speaking only a few steady words. "You're safe. Nobody here but us." And slowly, her breathing would calm, the terror ebbing like a storm passing over. In town, whispers began. Folks wondered about the girl living out at Cole's place. Some called her his wife already, though no vows had been spoken. Others muttered about her being a runaway, trouble following behind. But Cole didn't answer questions, and Anna didn't step into town often. The ranch became their world, a small fortress of peace built not from walls but from quiet trust. One evening, when the sky burned red with sunset, Anna stood by the corral watching the cattle graze. Cole joined her, leaning on the fence. For a long moment, they simply watched the animals, the steady rhythm of their chewing, the calm of the land around them. Then Anna spoke, her voice almost trembling. "I used to think I was cursed. That I wasn't meant to be loved. That maybe I was born just to suffer." Cole turned his head slightly, his gaze steady on her. "Ain't true." She met his eyes, her heart thudding. "How do you know?" "Because you're still here," he said simply. "Takes strength to keep standing. Takes more than most have." Her eyes filled, not with sorrow but with something like relief. She nodded, her lips pressing together, and for the first time, she let herself believe it might be true. Life didn't become easy overnight. The land was harsh, the work endless. But each day that passed, they built something wordless between them. It wasn't the kind of romance sung about in town dances or painted in books. It was slower, deeper, carved from survival, trust, and the quiet healing of two souls who had been alone too long. And though neither said it aloud, both knew, what began with a loaf of bread and a single act of mercy had grown into something stronger than either of them had expected, something that would carry them through whatever storms still waited beyond the horizon. The summer heat pressed down heavy on the land, the kind of heat that made the earth crack and the cattle restless. Cole woke at dawn as he always did, the sky barely touched with pink, and found Anna already up, stirring a pot of coffee on the stove. She had grown into her place there, moving quietly but with purpose, her hair tied back neatly, her hands steady. He didn't say much, but he noticed the difference every day, the way her cheeks held more color now, the way her eyes lingered on the horizon with a little less fear and a little more wonder. They ate breakfast together, the scrape of spoons in tin bowls the only sound, until she finally broke the silence. "I had a dream," she murmured, looking down at her porridge. "That I was back there. Back in that house. He was standing over me, telling me I'd never escape. I woke up choking on my own breath." Cole set his spoon down, watching her with calm eyes. "You're not there. You're here." She nodded, swallowing hard. "I know. It's just, it feels so real. Like he'll come riding up one day to drag me back." Cole leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "If he does, he'll have to go through me first." There was no bravado in his voice, just quiet certainty. Anna met his gaze, and for the first time she believed him, not because he was stronger or meaner than the man she had fled, but because Cole's steadiness was the kind of thing no cruelty could shake. That day, she followed him out to the fields, helping where she could. She wasn't strong enough to handle the heaviest work, but she learned to mend fences, to drive cattle slowly from one pasture to another, to keep her balance in the saddle. Her hands blistered, but she didn't complain. Cole saw the grit in her, the same grit that had kept her alive when she had nothing left to cling to. By evening, when the sun sank low and the cicadas began their buzzing chorus, they returned to the cabin covered in sweat and dust. She leaned against the porch rail, looking out at the land with tired satisfaction. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Even when it's harsh, it's still beautiful." Cole followed her gaze. "It'll break you if you let it. But if you stand your ground, it'll feed you, clothe you, keep you alive." She looked at him then, really looked, and wondered if he was talking about the land or about himself. Weeks passed, the rhythm of ranch life binding them tighter than words ever could. Anna began humming while she worked, little tunes she half remembered from childhood. Cole found himself listening without letting on, the sound softening the edges of his solitude. Sometimes, at night, she would sit by the fire and sew scraps of cloth into something resembling a quilt. He would glance up from whittling or oiling his rifle, watching the way her fingers moved with delicate patience. The cabin, once a place of silence, now breathed with quiet life. But peace has a way of drawing shadows. One morning, while Cole was saddling his horse, a rider appeared on the horizon. Dust rose behind him, and as he came closer, Cole saw the shine of a badge pinned to his chest. The sheriff. Anna stiffened when she spotted him, her hand gripping the edge of the porch rail. "It's them," she whispered hoarsely. "They've come for me." Cole's jaw tightened, but he said nothing until the sheriff rode up. The man tipped his hat. "Morning, Cole. Heard tell you've got company out here." His eyes flicked toward Anna, narrowing slightly. Cole's expression didn't change. "What of it?" "There's word in town," the sheriff said slowly, "that she belongs to a man east of here. Claims she's his wife, ran off with his money." Anna gasped. "That's a lie. He hurt me. He locked me up. Her voice broke. The sheriff raised a hand. "I ain't saying I know what's true. Just saying the law listens when a man with money talks loud enough." Cole's hand rested on the reins, his gaze steady. "She's staying here. If that man wants to make claims, he can do it face to face. With me." The sheriff studied him, then gave a slow nod. "I figured you'd say that. Just thought you ought to know trouble might be coming." With that, he turned his horse and rode off, leaving a trail of dust in his wake. Anna sank onto the porch step, her body trembling. "He won't stop. He'll come." Cole crouched down in front of her, his hand resting lightly on his knee. "Then we'll be ready." From that day, the ranch felt different. Cole began checking the fences more often, writing the boundary lines, making sure no one could sneak up unnoticed. He cleaned his rifle with meticulous care, laid extra wood by the door, stocked up on supplies. Anna watched him, torn between gratitude and fear. She wanted to believe safety could last, but deep down, she knew men like the one she had fled didn't let go so easily. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Anna whispered, "I don't want to be a burden to you." Cole glanced at her, brow furrowed. "You're not. I feel like I am. You didn't ask for this. You didn't ask for me." He set down the knife he'd been whittling with, his voice low but firm. "I didn't ask for a lot of things life gave me. Doesn't mean I'd trade them. You're here now. That's enough." Tears stung her eyes, but she blinked them away. No one had ever spoken of her as though her presence alone was enough. As autumn crept in, the air turned crisp, the leaves along the creek blazing golden red. Anna had grown stronger by then. She could ride for hours without tiring, handle chores without faltering, and her laughter came more easily. But every sound of hooves in the distance made her heart lurch, every stranger in town made her shrink back. The day finally came when her fears proved true. Cole was out in the fields when two riders appeared, their suits too fine for the dust of the prairie. One of them she recognized instantly, her husband. His face was sharp, cruel, his mouth twisted in a sneer as he dismounted and strode toward the cabin. Anna froze on the porch, her whole body rigid. He called her name, his voice dripping with false sweetness. "Anna, my darling. There you are. Caused me quite a bit of trouble, running off. Come now, let's go home." She shook her head violently, backing toward the door. "No, I'm not yours." His smile vanished, replaced by cold fury. He grabbed her wrist, squeezing hard enough to make her cry out. You think you can shame? No, I'm not yours. His smile vanished, replaced by cold fury. He grabbed her wrist, squeezing hard enough to make her cry out. You think you can shame me? Make me a fool. Before she could answer, a shadow fell across them. Cole stood a few feet away, his rifle leveled, his voice calm but unyielding. Let her go. The man sneered. She's my wife. Cole's eyes didn't waver. Not anymore. The standoff stretched, the prairie wind whipping between them. Finally, the man's grip loosened, and he shoved Anna back toward the porch. You'll regret this, cowboy. No woman is worth dying over. He swung onto his horse, his companion following, and with a final glare, they rode off into the distance. Anna collapsed against the porch rail, her breath ragged. Cole lowered his rifle, his jaw tight. He didn't say anything, just stood there, watching the horizon until the riders disappeared completely. That night, as the fire burned low, Anna whispered, Why did you do it? Why risk everything for me? Cole looked into the flames, his voice quiet. Because no one ever should have let you stand there in that town, begging for bread. Because I know what it is to lose everything. And because you're worth more than what he tried to make you believe. She covered her face with her hands, tears spilling freely. For the first time, they weren't tears of fear or shame, but of something she hadn't felt in years, hope. And in the silence that followed, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the steady beat of her heart, Anna realized that whatever storms might come, she wasn't facing them alone anymore. Winter came hard that year, the kind of winter that tested both man and beast. The snow fell in heavy blankets across the prairie, piling against the cabin walls, weighing down the roof until Cole had to climb up more than once with a shovel to keep it from caving in. The cattle pressed against each other in the corral, steam rising from their backs, and every morning Cole trudged out to break ice from the water troughs, his breath clouding thick in the air. Anna worked beside him, her cheeks raw from the cold, her hands cracked despite the mittens he'd traded for in town. They were tired, both of them, but they kept moving, because life didn't pause for sorrow or fear, not out there, where survival depended on grit. The memory of that day when her husband came still lingered like a shadow, though he hadn't returned. Sometimes Anna would catch Cole staring out at the horizon, his rifle leaning against the wall, as if waiting for riders who never came. At first, she thought the silence between them was heavy with unspoken dread, but as the days shortened and the fire became their only warmth, she began to understand it differently. It wasn't fear in him, it was watchfulness. It was the quiet promise that if danger returned, he would meet it head-on. One night, while the snow howled against the shutters and the wind shrieked like wolves across the plain, Anna lay awake on her side of the cabin, staring at the flickering shadows on the wall. She could hear Cole's steady breathing, slow and calm. She thought of how she'd first seen him, dusty, quiet, a stranger who had handed her bread without asking for anything in return. That simple act had been the beginning of everything. She turned toward him, her voice trembling as it broke the darkness. Cole. He stirred but didn't open his eyes. Do you ever regret it? Bringing me here? His breath deepened, and then he opened his eyes, the firelight catching the sharpness of his features. Not once. Her throat tightened. She wanted to tell him how much it meant, how he had saved her life not just by pulling her away from town but by giving her back a sense of worth she thought had been beaten out of her forever. But the words caught in her chest, too heavy to release. So she only whispered, "Thank you." He held her gaze for a long moment, then closed his eyes again. "Get some sleep, Anna. Tomorrow's another day." She rolled back onto her side, but sleep didn't come easily. Her heart felt full, too full, with emotions she hadn't dared let herself feel in years. For the first time, she realized she wasn't afraid of loving him. She was only afraid he wouldn't see himself as worthy of being loved back. Spring broke the land free of its frozen grip, the snow melting into swollen creeks that cut through the valley. Wildflowers bloomed again, and the cattle grazed on new grass. Life returned with color and warmth, and so too did something shift between Anna and Cole. They spent more time together in small, unspoken ways. He began showing her how to mend saddles, how to read the signs of weather in the clouds, how to steady her aim with the rifle. She learned quickly, her determination driving her, and he found himself quietly impressed by how much strength she carried in such a small frame. She was no longer the ghostly figure begging in rags. She had become something else, resilient, rooted, and alive. One afternoon, while repairing a section of fence, Anna paused and leaned against the post, brushing sweat from her brow. "Cole," she said softly, "do you ever think about what it would have been like, if your wife had lived?" He looked up from his work, the question cutting deeper than he expected. He set down his hammer and stared out across the field, his voice rougher than usual. "Every day, for a long time. Thought maybe I was cursed, same as you did. Thought maybe I wasn't meant to have anyone stay." He turned to her then, his eyes steady. "But life doesn't ask what we want. It just gives what it gives. And sometimes it gives you a second chance." Her breath caught in her throat. She didn't need him to say more. The look in his eyes was enough. It wasn't the look of a man haunted by the past anymore, it was the look of a man who had finally let it rest. That night, as they sat by the fire, Anna reached across the table and placed her hand over his. It was a simple touch, hesitant at first, but when he didn't pull away, she let her fingers curl slightly into his. He glanced down at their joined hands, then up at her, and though no words were spoken, the silence between them was louder than any vow. The months that followed wove them closer. The townsfolk whispered, of course, but neither cared. Some said Cole had taken in a runaway bride to soften his lonely years, others claimed Anna was a curse who'd bring him nothing but trouble. But when Cole rode into town with her sitting tall beside him on horseback, her head held high, the whispers fell away. They were together. That was enough. Yet not all shadows disappear with time. Late that summer, word came through the sheriff that Anna's husband had been killed in a dispute over land, shot dead by one of his own men. The news struck Anna with a strange, hollow silence. She felt no joy in it, no victory. Only a deep, aching emptiness for the years stolen from her by his cruelty. That night she sat on the porch, staring at the horizon long after the sun went down, and Cole came to sit beside her without a word. Finally, she whispered, "It's over." He nodded slowly. "It's over." And though grief and relief tangled inside her, she leaned her head against his shoulder, letting the quiet strength of his presence steady her. The seasons turned again, each one binding them tighter into the fabric of the life they were building. Anna planted a small garden by the cabin, herbs and vegetables sprouting in neat rows. Cole built her a chicken coop, shaking his head at her stubbornness but secretly glad to see her joy at gathering fresh eggs each morning. Their world was simple, but it was theirs, and every sunrise brought with it a new kind of peace. One evening, when the air was heavy with the scent of blooming wild roses, Anna stood by the corral watching the sky fade into twilight. Cole joined her, his hands rough from the day's work, his hat pushed back slightly. She turned to him, her heart pounding, and whispered, "I never thought I'd find a place where I belonged. But I have. With you." He didn't answer right away. He never rushed his words. But when he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of truth. "You're not just here with me, Anna. You're part of me now." Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. She stepped closer, her hand resting lightly against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. And in that quiet moment, under the wide expanse of the prairie sky, she knew she had finally come home, not just to a place, but to a man who had given her back her life. They never spoke of marriage in grand terms. There were no preachers, no gatherings, no lace or flowers. But one morning, Cole carved two simple rings from silver he had traded for in town, and as they stood by the creek where they had once camped on their first night together, he slid one onto her finger. "Don't need papers or a crowd," he said simply. "Just this. You and me." Anna's hands trembled as she placed the other ring on his rough finger, her voice breaking as she whispered, "Always." The creek murmured beside them, the cottonwood swaying gently, and in that sacred stillness, their vows were made, not with speeches but with the quiet, unyielding strength of two souls who had been broken and mended together. Years would pass. The ranch would grow, fences stretching farther, cattle multiplying. The cabin would gain another room, then another, as children's laughter filled the spaces once silent. Anna would teach them songs she had hummed in secret during her darkest days, and Cole would teach them the language of the land, the way to read the sky, the patience of cattle, the courage it took to face a storm. And though life would never be easy, though winters would still bite and droughts would still threaten, they would face it all together. For the lonely cowboy who once rode into town for supplies and found instead a starving bride begging for bread had discovered something far greater than he had ever sought. He had found love in its truest form, not the fragile, fleeting kind, but the kind forged in hardship, sealed in silence, and carried through the years with a strength that could not be broken. And Anna, once discarded and forgotten, had found not just bread to feed her body, but a home to feed her soul.